let's talk more about this, and to join us to talk about the rise in global food prices, we're joined by Joseph Glauber. He's a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute. Joe, welcome. Thanks for coming in. I certainly appreciate it.
No, thanks very much.
Now, you've been on this a long time. We were talking before we came on.
Yeah.
Kind of back up, because it is cyclical, but have you ever seen anything like this?
Well, we've had a whole set of issues that have affected agricultural markets, you know, going back to COVID, even prior to COVID with the U.S.-China trade war, for example. But COVID in particular, and then the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you know, we saw prices hit record levels. They've come down a lot, which was mentioned at the beginning of the show. The commodities like wheat and corn and soybeans and other commodities have come down substantially since May or so of 2022. But food prices, that is what you're paying at the grocery store, they have lingered and are you know, remain quite high in some countries.
Yeah, I think really want to stress, we're not talking about just here in the U.S. where people complained, rightly so, about food prices leading up to the presidential election, but reading globally, prices or some 65% higher than before the pandemic, which just seems staggering. So kind of walk us through what this means for people around the world, and considering the wide disparity between the rich and the poor, I imagine people are getting wildly different experiences.
Yeah, that's true, and remember, we're talking about commodities denominated in U.S. dollars, and so if you go to a place like Egypt where the Egyptian pound is quite weak relative to the dollar, even though the wheat prices have declined substantially in dollar terms, for Egyptian pounds, they're still quite high. And so they are purchasing, as far as their local currency is concerned, wheat is still very expensive.
Yeah, sadly, those of us who go to the grocery store, once prices go up, they generally don't come back down no matter what happens. So let's talk about the spiking of the staples, because we talked about vegetable oil, right, which is used everywhere, but also cheese, sugar. Why are those really hitting it right now?
Well, you know, vegetable oil is being driven largely by palm oil. So if you look at the global market for vegetable oils, there's roughly 4 oils that really stand out. Soybean oil, you know, which is grown largely in the U.S. and Brazil and parts of South America, soybeans that is, and the oil that comes from that. Rapeseed or canola oil, that's grown in a lot of Northern Europe, Canada. And then sunflower oil is the third one, and that's, you know, we saw Ukraine was a large exporter of sunflower oil, and then palm oil. Palm oil accounts for about almost 60% of global vegetable oil. Wow. That's mainly grown in Indonesia and Malaysia, and remember last year we had this big El Nino event that hit Southeast Asia, and palm oil production was affected by that.
Yeah, and let's talk more about that, because I've been following climate change for decades, and I remember in the 90s, people were concerned about how this could affect food prices down the road. Has it come home to roost? And what concerns do you have that a major country in the world could be putting itself back in a position of being a climate change denier?
Well, yeah, there's no question that the you know, these periodic El Nino events are highly correlated in how they affect places like Southeast Asia. They're, you know, very much affected, as is Australia, as is Southern Africa, as is South America. But because so much palm oil is concentrated in that region, I might add rice is another commodity. Sure. 80% of the rice or so is in Southeast Asia or South Asia. And so when you have a big event that affects production in those countries, that will have obvious impacts on world markets. Now, the other thing I would say about vegetable oil, remember, a lot of that goes for industrial use. So a lot of it goes into things like biodiesel. Indonesia has a program right now where 35% of their fuel is from biodiesel. And that means you're diverting a lot of food supplies into that. The U.S. same way. Something almost 50% of our soybean oil that's consumed in this country is consumed in biodiesel. Yeah. So, I mean, so we talk about high food prices, but some of that is due to these demand drivers on mandates and other sorts of things.
Interesting. There is a positive aspect to a degree floating around out there. Meat prices, they have actually gone down slightly. What about poultry and pork, and what about nations where they find it difficult to get fresh meat?
Well, Yeah, so if you go down through the animal products, that's right. The meat prices, meats really suffered a lot during COVID, largely because of big supply chain issues. And we remember here in the US, we had big problems with meat packing facilities with COVID and other things. But in general, they actually benefit, obviously, from lower feed costs. And so when corn prices are down and soybean prices are down, that's good news for animals, you know, because they can feed them cheaper. Poultry is typically something that can turn around very fast because you can get a new
40 days
flock.
or so.
Yeah, that's right. But we have had problems, particularly in the U.S., with high-path influenza, avian influenza, which is, you know, in some cases, flocks have had to be destroyed. That we've seen that in particular with egg layers.
Yeah.
So, you know, we've seen these prices for eggs go through the roof, then come back down. Poultry prices too have been volatile as well. But in general, dairy prices have been up a little bit over the last year. But again, these price levels are low relative to
The way they were.
yeah, 2 years ago or 3 years ago in 2022. I mean, they've just come down a lot.